Hi everybody! In this video we are going to cover quilting, which is part 5 in our How to Quilt series. What quilting is it's holding all of the layers together permanently with stitching. I'm going to show you how to do it right now. Step 1 is get all of your supplies ready to go. What you're going to need is a lot of thread. I get one of these really big spools of just a high quality 100% cotton thread. I like my quilts to be 100% cotton, so I stick with that even with the thread. Then you're going to need a walking foot, which looks like this, and it attaches to your machine, and it has little grooves on the bottom of the foot, just like the feed dogs on the bottom of the sewing machine. So the bottom and the top teeth will grab the quilt sandwich together and it will pull it evenly instead of just the top being a piece of metal like a regular presser foot, and it kind of drags on the top of the quilt and while the bottom is being pulled through. So this pulls both of them through. Then with the walking foot there's also a little attachment that will go into it, and this is the guide bar. So this is helpful for just maintaining a guide. So if you're following another series of stitches, this will go over the stitches, and that way the stitches that are being done right here fall totally in line with the previous row of stitches. Then you're going to need something to mark your quilt. So a ruler for a straight line, and with this ruler you can use a couple different methods. You can do an erasable pen to mark the lines on the quilt. For this option you should be very confident that it will come out, or you could use something like the blunt edge of a butter knife, and you would just press into the quilt lightly and it will make a slight indentation. It's very temporary, but it works for establishing a guiding line. Or you can use painter's tape. The low stickiness of this tape is really good for quilting because it stays there, the line won't move, and it comes off really well without leaving any sticky residue. And then you'll need your sewing machine and your quilt, and you're pretty much ready to go. Then step 2 is picking your design. So for this video we're going to be dealing with straight line quilting. So you could do a bunch of straight lines and do something like matchstick quilting. You could do diagonal cross quilting, or you could even do something like a square that progressively gets bigger and bigger. For my example, I'm going to be doing diagonal stitching, and most of it is going to be done with a stitch in the ditch method, which is where the two fabrics come up together and that seam in between them you stitch right in that seam, and that's called stitching in the ditch. Step 3 is to get everything prepared. You'll want to prepare a few bobbins ahead of time, and then thread your machine, get your walking foot on it. Make sure that your machine settings are set to what you want it to be. I like to set my stitch length at the longest my machine will go, and it's my basting stitch, but I like the way it looks with the quilt, and that's at a 5 on my machine. Then you'll get your quilt rolled to where the center point of your quilt is exposed, because you're going to start quilting from the center, working your way out. I'll show you how I rolled mine in just a second. So then when you have everything set and you're just ready to get going, I recommend you take one extra step to make sure that your settings are how you want them to be. Get 2 small pieces of fabric and batting. Make your own like little 10 by 10 mini quilt, and then just do a couple rows to practice and make sure it looks exactly as you want it to be. Get used to the walking foot if you've never used it before. And then step 4, it's the last step and it's the longest step. You're gonna quilt and quilt and quilt, and enjoy the process. Turn on music or a podcast and just keep going and maintain your quality with every line that you sew. And just keeping that one line exposed, and then I'll roll the other side. This side that's on the open side of the sewing machine doesn't have to be as rolled tight because it doesn't have anything that it's having to slide through. Since you have a long line to sew and you're going to be starting all the way at one side, you can kind of just fold up the side that's going to be sitting in your lap and make room for this. Now this is ready to take over to the sewing machine. I have the quilt in my lap, and this is the line that I'm going to be stitching on first, but right here I don't have a a ditch to sew in. And so what I did is I just took a ruler and a little butter knife and just pressed down into the quilt along that ruler, and it just creates a little tiny indentation, and I will just stitch along this indentation, and then I'll use that guide from then on out to show the spacing. But this will just be the first one that I just put a crease in to follow. So I'll just get aligned, and I would like my stitches to be as far apart as my machine will sew. And so I'm going to put that all the way up. I'll put down the foot, and I'll go forward and backward. And then I'm going to just go ahead and quilt that line now. As I'm going, you can see I'm using both of my hands to kind of pull the fabric nice and taut, and you can feel as you go just to make sure that there's no wrinkles underneath. You'll be able to feel a little bump. Right here, I am stitching in the ditch, and this is going to be my guide until I get to the end of the quilt. So now that I've gotten to the end of that line, I did a little back stitch, and I'm going to take this off, cut the threads, and I'm going to bring this all back onto my lap. And this is where I started. So now I'm going to start back up on this side because I don't want to start from the other side, or else we're going to have little pulls go back to the top every single time. And we're going to slowly just work our way over, and we're going to have less and less fabric coming up in this opening and more over here where we have plenty of room. And that's why we start in the center, because the center is kind of the focal point of the quilt, and it's also the hardest part to have go through the first time. So now I don't have to make a mark because I'm just going to be using this little guide bar, which I'll put in there. And then to set it to where I want it to be and get the exact distance, I'm just going to go and set it at my next square. Okay, so if I'm stitching right here, then I'm going to set this bar on my previous stitches. And as you can see, I'm going to be running into pins, so I'm just going to get my little box open and ready and take the pins out one at a time as I come up to them. As you can see, I've quilted one half of the quilt, and now I've got to do the other side. But this was the side that was getting smaller and smaller in that opening of my machine. And now if I keep going from top to bottom, more and more is going to bunch up in that space. I am going to start from the bottom, and I'm just going to keep starting from the bottom and going to the top. So only one section will be quilted in opposite directions, and then the rest are going to be going in the same direction. So if there's any shifting, I'm just going to do my best to keep it very, very smooth, and this one particular row I'm going to be careful with. So now I'm just going to get this side quilted, and then I'm going to quilt the other direction, so I end up with little quilted squares. So I have my quilt completely quilted, and the very last thing that I do, which is kind of hard to see here, but I just stitch along the very edge. I stitch about 1/8 to at the most 1/4 away from the very edge, and just stitch all the way around the perimeter just to set everything in place and to be prepared for binding, which is the final step. So coming next is how to actually do the binding, and that will be part 6. Make sure to subscribe to my channel by clicking the subscribe button and the little bell alert, and that will notify you anytime that I post a video. Thank you so much for watching. Now go get creative and make something that you love.